and it is August 10th, and we're looking at Ezra 10 as we read through the Bible in a year, in the 1 year Bible. So for this August 10th, we're going to look at all that happens in Ezra 10. And so after Ezra's prayer that we mentioned last time, a very great assembly of people of all ages gathered around him and wept bitterly. It was the Sabbath. This is not surprising. A man named Shechaniah speaks up and confesses their sin. He proposes to rectify the situation and promises to support Ezra in the task. So the oath is made for them to divorce their foreign wives, and so Ezra fasts and stays the night in the house of Johanan. A proclamation was made throughout Judah and Jerusalem that all the people should assemble there. And when they assembled, it was raining quite a bit, and Ezra stood up and confronted them with their sin. They were out in the open and told them all to make confession and separate themselves from their foreign wives and from the people of the land. Because of the heavy rain and the enormity of the undertaking, they set up a process for people to come at appointed times, and the process took about 2 months. Then in the final section, it lists the sons of the priests who had married foreign women and Levites and people of Israel, in particular the leaders who had married foreign women. And it ends on the somewhat anticlimactic note that there were some children born to these marriages. In reality, this looks at some of the grave consequences of what had happened. Typically, at that time, children would stay with their mothers. As was mentioned earlier in the chapter, it's worth exploring, though, some of the theological issues involved, since the divorces mentioned in Ezra can be quite troubling, to say the least, because marriage is a divinely ordained and holy estate, and divorce is contrary to the intention of the sixth commandment. Indeed, there are marriages to foreign women, Rahab and Ruth, in Jesus' own family tree. And both marriages were accepted without question in Israel. Paul even gives the instruction that Christian spouses should not divorce their unbelieving partners if the unbeliever is willing to live peacefully within the marriage. Yet in Ezra, as we look at the context, to make a long story short, it's not simply about marriage. In fact, the first commandment is at stake. The people of Judah were to separate themselves from various detestable practices of their pagan neighbors, including child sacrifice to the false god Moloch. All detestable practices or abominations, as they're called, centered on idolatry, on people worshiping the creation instead of the creator. And so it's not simply that they married foreign women, but rather that they forgot to obey the first commandment in the first place. Now, because of sin, the commandments, which really don't conflict with each other, sometimes come into conflict. In other words, sin has as one of its terrible consequences the fact that once we commit sin, then we find ourselves in a worse situation. And sometimes that means that one commandment is even pitted against another. It's kind of a hopeless feeling to be in that situation. What do you do? And so really there's no good answer, but because the first commandment is the most important, because all the other commandments are based off of the first commandment, you cannot let go of the first commandment in this case, even though there are grave and serious consequences for their actions. So it's like choosing something that's the best possible thing, but really there is no good choice. And so that's what we have here. Sin against both the first commandment and the sixth commandment, and all the commandments call for repentance and forgiveness. For us as Christians within marriage, we're called to live differently, though, as Christians, married to one another, knowing that marriage between Christians is intended by God to reflect the mutual love between Christ and his church. Paul called this a great mystery, for it is the mystery of the gospel itself. Just a reminder here that in this case, when life gets complicated because of sin, and that certainly does happen, we see that in Ezra, we see the terrible results. But when life gets complicated, we can still rely upon the forgiveness and love of God in Jesus Christ. And that is good to know. May God be with you and bless you, and I'll look forward